experience with Tech Week. If you've been to one of the other sessions, then hope you've been having fun. Certainly, we've had some good sessions so far today. Okay, just really to recap on some housekeeping, which Sam mentioned. But as we said, we will be recording the sessions, so they will be available for later viewing. You'll be notified what the procedure is going to be in terms of doing that. We have an email address. I apologise, I've not updated my slide. We changed the email address today. And I didn't get around to updating my slide, so I apologise. So we have an email address of techweek@qa.com. Thank you. So if you'd like to raise any questions after the event, whether they be technical, non-technical, then please do. And really, this is the first time we've done this, so we'd really appreciate any comments, what you thought we did well, what we did badly, so we can hopefully improve and have future sessions. Also, in addition, if it is about the session specifically, if you've got a technical question, you're more than welcome to contact myself directly, paul.gregory@qa.com. Alternatively, again, you can use the techweek@qa.com and just obviously mention my name, Paul Gregory, and the fact it's the Hyper-V session that you're referring to, so that we can route it correctly. Hopefully, as the idea behind this is we're going to hopefully just generally have a bit of a Hyper-V surgery at the end if anyone's got any Hyper-V questions. So obviously feel free to start popping those into the chat window. But also, if you feel your question's too complex to ask through this forum, feel free to email me as well. So in terms of what we're going to talk about is we're really going to look at some of the more advanced features of Hyper-V Replica. So Hyper-V Replica has now been about for a couple of years, but there were some new features introduced in R2, and just really want to sort of talk about those new features. So we will have a quick review on what Hyper-V Replica is, but the idea is to try and focus on the new features themselves. So that's the plan. So as part of the review, obviously Hyper-V allows us to take a virtual machine that's running on one physical Hyper-V host and effectively replicate that Hyper-V to a second physical host. So that's the basic idea and what we've always had from Hyper-V Replica. So we need two hosts. We obviously need sufficient storage and network capacity to allow the replication to occur, and we need to either have, or we need some form of authentication mechanism, whether that be certificate-based or whether that be Active Directory. I guess the key thing, which is always important to highlight when talking about protection technologies, is to align where protection technologies sit. So it is quite important to be aware of that Hyper-V Replica is designed as a HA solution, a DR solution, a disaster recovery solution, not a high availability, a HA solution, or as a fault tolerant solution. So quite often, one of the key attributes of a disaster recovery solution is failover is not instantaneous, and quite often would need an element of manual procedure. So, obviously the idea with Replica is to provide us with a disaster recovery. We've lost the building, we need to recover to another location. So people are expecting some level of outage in those scenarios. So if you did want a high availability solution from Microsoft with Hyper-V and you wanted a DR, then obviously we would use failover clustering to provide us with high availability within a geographical location normally, and then we would use Hyper-V Replica to provide disaster recovery across locations. That would be the idea, that would be the approach that we would try to go. Again, I guess it's worth just reiterating here, HA, again, isn't a completely transparent solution, as opposed to, for example, fault tolerance. And Microsoft has decided to implement fault tolerant technologies inside their application. So with technologies like always-on availability groups inside SQL and database availability groups inside Exchange. So Microsoft have done it to in the application level, and that actually avoids a whole load of limitations you can get at the hardware level. So fault tolerance is a part of the solution in certain applications, and obviously we're not looking at that yet. So the first thing I'd like to just talk about really in terms of this review of Hyper-V Replica is actually how Microsoft changed Hyper-V Replica in 2012 R2, because they did make a significant change to the way the replication process occurs. Part of this was to actually improve the replication traffic. Part of it was to actually make it more flexible when bringing systems online and so on. So what Microsoft used to do was effectively use snapshots as a way to actually create delta differences for virtual machines at points in time at 1 hour intervals. The system actually works slightly differently now. So effectively what we end up with is when we create a replica virtual machine, so you can see that we've basically created a virtual machine on our second host at our recovery site, and we've got the VHD file which obviously contains the virtual machine's data. As part of enabling replication, we now create a log file, so we have got HRL extension if you was to look inside the file system, which will actually contain all the changes. So we'll write them to the VHD, we'll also write them to this log file as well. So the idea then being, when we actually copy that data across, we actually apply the changes to the VHD. So the VHD on the virtual machine is up to date. So if we're in a disaster scenario, there's no requirement to actually apply the log file to the VHD. The log file is used in scenarios if we need to roll back to an earlier point in time. So there can be some latency in terms of rolling back to an earlier point if that's what we needed to do. So just some changes there in terms of how the replication engine works. And those that have set up Hyper-V Replica under 2012, when you set it up under 2012 R2, you will notice in the snapshot on now we name the checkpoint window a change in the fact that you don't see all these points in time that you can roll back to. So let's get into some of the advanced elements that I'd like to talk about. So again, starting off with elements that we could have done with 2012, and then we'll start to move into new features in 2012 R2. In terms of the replication data itself, one of the things that often people have a lot of concerns about is if I'm replicating one virtual machine or two virtual machines, I don't really have a big issue in terms of the replication data. But more and more systems are becoming more and more mission critical, or even if they're not mission critical, the greater requirement to be able to keep as many systems up and running as possible. So one of the things we want to try and do is try and generate as much or reduce as much of the replication traffic as possible. One of the things that's just quite interesting, and actually it's a statistic that I picked up when I work with Data Protection Manager, and the fact that with Data Protection Manager, one of the things Microsoft recommend is actually putting the page file for a virtual machine into a separate VHD. And the reason for that is depending on what the virtual machine is doing, actual differential changes between VHD files can actually represent up to 80% of the amount of data that we're backing up. So if you think about that from a replica point of view, you can actually have situations where you've got virtual machines, excuse me, where most of the data that's changing in them on an individual replication interval could be page file related, and that's all being replicated across over onto your virtual machine in your disaster recovery site. So actually, a substantial amount of your replication could be replicating data which is of no meaningful use to yourself at all, because when you sort of bring up the replica virtual machine, the page file's wiped, and effectively you start with a blank page file. So one of the things we could do here is we can actually take that same methodology that's used within Data Protection Manager in Replica, because Replica does allow me to actually choose which specific files I would like to replicate across. So we could actually just move the page file into a separate VHD and exclude that from being replicated across our wide area link. So instantly, a very significant saving in replication traffic for a lot of people, with actually sort of no cost or anything along those lines. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing that people often forget about, and when I talk about Hyper-V Replica in my classrooms, is actually dealing with your DR site being on a remote subnet. So chances are that remote subnet is using a different IP address scheme. So in the event you need to bring up that recovery virtual machine, then you've got to deal with all of the IP address related issues to allow that machine to come online and become active. Now, if you've just got to bring one virtual machine up, then there's not much work, not much effort in that area. But if you were in a real disaster recovery scenario, then really what we want to be able to do is try and minimize the effort that we've got to bring all the systems online and get everything up and running again. So, people have used things like stretch VLANs in the past to create a single IP subnet spanning multiple geographical locations. Obviously, network virtualization. The network virtualization features can actually be used, but obviously a lot of people are not really ready for network virtualization yet. It's a bit of an emerging technology. One of the things we get with Hyper-V Replica is IP injection. So we can actually get Hyper-V to change the IP address on the fly as it's actually bringing the virtual machine up. And hopefully I'm going to try and demonstrate that to you. So the nice thing about the IP injection is it allows us to actually designate what the changes, what the different IP addresses are going to be to VMs once they're all stable, once they've all been replicated. And we don't have to configure those things when we're in mass panic because we're trying to get the other system up. Had a question raised, just reference about with my page file conversation, is that a split page file or 100%? Really what I was illustrating is 100% of the page file being moved away from your data and your OS volumes, and just have a separate disk for that. And I will show you how we would set that up and build that as part of the demonstrations that I'm going to do. So without delay, let's jump straight across and actually have a look at how we would set up replication for a virtual machine where we didn't want to copy the page file across, and how would we actually get the multiple IP subnet model working. So I'm going to sort of jump between these two demonstrations a little bit because obviously some of the setup process is going to take a little while. So hopefully I'm just going to share my my desktop. So hopefully you'll be able to see the desktop of my system. Okay, and cancel there. And hopefully you'll be able to see the remote desktop session I've got connected. So just to sort of go through what I've got quite quickly. First of all, I've got Hyper-V host 01, which actually contains my infrastructure VMs. So I effectively got my domain controller. I've got a machine running orchestrator. Hopefully, if some of you haven't signed up for it, try and convince you to attend my orchestrator session on Friday. It's the same time as this. For me, Microsoft's best kept secret. And I'm just using orchestrator to exercise the VM that I'm replicating at the moment. And obviously a SQL database backend. I've then got Hyper-V host 2, which effectively has 2 virtual machines. And significantly for QA-FS01, what we've actually got here is we've actually got replication running at this precise moment. So we can actually see we've got some replication going on. We missed a couple of cycles there. Not to worry about that. And then I've hopefully got my web machine, which is the one that I'm going to sort of demonstrate setting up with the without the page file configuration. And where they're actually going to is actually Hyper-V host 03 at the moment. So that's where the machines are actually being replicated to, or will be when we finish. So let's start off with looking at the page file component, because that does require a bit of setup work, and then we can leave that replicating and hopefully see what it looks like at the other end once it's been completed. So the first thing I'd just like to highlight with the virtual machine is if I just go into its settings we should hopefully be able to see that I've actually got a hard disk on the SCSI controller. Obviously, it doesn't need to be on the SCSI controller, where I'm going to effectively move the page file to. So hopefully you can see that. So I've already created the VHD, and when we actually go into the virtual machine, we'll see that that disk actually exists quite happily. So hopefully if we just go and sign into the virtual machine, okay, just bear with me for a second, just move things around a little bit. So if I go into disk management, what we should be able to see when disk management loads is I've actually already got that disk in place. And you can see that basically just a standard volume. I've given it a drive letter B. Obviously, it doesn't need to be called that. You can see we've got that there. So then, obviously, if I just go into the system configuration, I can effectively use the advanced system settings to move my page file across onto that drive P. So under performance settings, obviously pretty standard Windows stuff, this, nothing special at all. I can go into the virtual memory and I can effectively say that on drive C, I'm not going to have a paging file. And on drive P, I'm actually just going to set that to system managed. Okay, so hopefully I've moved the page file across. So that's all I would need to do inside the virtual machine itself. So I can now close those down, and we can now go and configure Replica for this particular virtual machine. So the key element here, when we go through enabling replication, okay, is we're going to also reduce the virtual disks that we're actually going to copy across. So one of the things you've got to think about is actually how are you going to get a copy of that virtual machine in terms of the initial copy across? Because this is only going to copy the VHDs that we tell it to copy. It's not going to go and copy that one for the page file. So there are a few things, and actually what I'm going to do, just for the purpose of speed, is I'm actually just going to highlight the QA Web 01, and because this is 2012, we can do an online export. So I'm just actually going to export my virtual machine out. Actually, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to connect across directly. You sometimes find that the export utility doesn't work brilliantly through a remote Hyper-V console. So I'm actually just going to export that virtual machine directly. So that will obviously take a little while to go and complete the export. So the idea being, what I'll do is I'll then take those files, I'll copy those files onto host number 3, and I will then import that. So I'll actually have a virtual machine on host number 3, which is effectively a copy of the machine that's on host 2. But that copy on host 3 will obviously be switched off, and effectively the one that I'm going to use as the base point for starting the replication. So while we're just waiting for that to complete, sorry, excuse me, just need to switch me windows. Too many toolbars at the top. That's the problem. Okay, so if we was to, I'll just wait that a second. While we're waiting for that to export, if we just go to FS01, so this is FS01 on host 2. So as we've seen, actually, while I've been talking, you would have noticed on the status the changes being replicated across. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go across to FS03, and I'm actually just going to go into the settings of the virtual machine, and we're going to look at these failover TCP/IP settings. So as I said, we'd sort of jump between the two demos just because of how long it takes to sort of copy and synchronize the data. So if you've not seen this before, in the network adapter settings, once you've got a machine that's got Hyper-V Replica enabled, we have these failover TCP/IP settings. Now, my two hosts are actually on different subnets, so Host 2 is actually on 192.168.1. Host 3 is actually on 192.168.2, so on different networks. So if I'm in a failure scenario, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to change the IP address of my FSO1 virtual machine. So I'm going to want to have an IP address that's going to be valid for the network that I've actually moved it across onto. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to specify the IP address that I would actually like it to have in the event that we have a failure scenario. So I'd like it to have 192.168.2.10. Okay, obviously I'm going to give it a subnet mask. 0. And I can also go and specify default gateway information. So 192.168.2.1 will be the default gateway address. And then whatever you'd like the DNS server to be. So my DNS server is 1.210. Let's give it that last comma as well. As you can see, you could actually put IPv6 addresses in here. So currently, the VM is running on the 192.168.1 network. In the event we have a failure, and I'll obviously generate a failure, we will bring the machine up and its IP address will be changed as part of that. Now, depending on the type of failure you have, it's also quite important to remember what you might want to do is reverse the direction of replication. So actually, in terms of the replication, it's quite important to remember that if we go and change the IP address of the virtual machine, then the IP address is going to get replicated back the other way. So again, even on the source VM, you more than likely want to configure what you'd like the IP addresses to be. So if we were just to open this box, just to show you, I don't want to sort of cheat at all. I'd like you to make sure that you sort of see all the facts. So hopefully if we connect to FSO1, so obviously my host is a little bit busy doing its export at this precise moment. So hopefully we'll be able to just sign into this virtual machine. There we go. Okay, so if we just confirm the network settings, once it loads, we can make sure that we apply obviously all of the correct settings back to the virtual machine. And then obviously by showing you the IP address settings here as well, that also means that we'll see the IP settings change when we actually initiate the failover. Ooh, I better go and stop my automated process that's generating data for me. Do that in a second. Okay, so if we just go into the network settings, we can see this has 1.10 as opposed to the 2.10, which I asked it to have when it has a failover. So we'll just jump into the settings and we will go and configure the settings for when the virtual machine comes back. Okay, so 192.168.1.10, 255.255.255.0, and 192.168.1.1, and obviously the same DNS server. Okay, so hopefully got all those settings entered correctly. Okay, so we're at the point now that we've actually configured all of those IP settings so that we're ready in the event that we actually have a failure. And the whole idea is we set all of this up ahead of time so we're not in that panic state when we're actually having our failures. We can also see now our export's finished. So what I'm just going to do quickly is I'm just going to copy the files from host 2 across onto host 1. So hopefully we can just go into the export folder. I can copy the web content. And what I'm going to do is just copy that over onto host 3. And I'm going to put that into a replica VMs folder. So that's just got about 10 gigabytes to go and copy. So hopefully it shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. So while we're waiting for that, hopefully what we can do is using host 1, we can go and hopefully see this IP injection. So there's a few things that I just want to load up to hopefully try and show you what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is connect to my domain controller, because obviously Windows machines register themselves in DNS. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to see the current IP address for QAFS01, and we want to see that information change. We also want to have Event Viewer open so that we can see a few things that happen inside Event Viewer. Specifically on host 3 is where we want to see the changes. I'm going to connect to another computer and connect to host 3 hopefully, and just open up the logs so they're ready for us when we want to come in and have a look in here. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything drastic like pulling power cables out or anything along those lines. What I'm actually going to do is, walk through a planned failover scenario in this instance. So if you're familiar with Hyper-V Replica, sort of planned failover is really the model that we would use when we're going to have a controlled outage in our data center. So say, for example, we've got to upgrade our uninterruptible power supply infrastructure, and therefore we need to switch over to our DR data center for the weekend to keep our production systems running. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to implement a planned failover, in order to do a planned failover, we do need to do a shutdown. So I'm going to just right click and hit shutdown. So that's actually going to shut down to the file server. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long to actually go and shut that machine down. So once FS01 has actually been shut down, I will then be able to initiate a planned failover. And the key thing with a planned failover is we try to replicate all the latest changes across. So if you was replicating every 15 minutes, when we initiate the planned failover, if we've not replicated for 10 minutes, we make sure that we move all of those last sort of set of changes across. And it does therefore assume that the replicate VM comes up exactly as per the one you've shut down. So right click, replication, I'm going to initiate a planned failover. So I'm asking it to reverse the direction of replication as well, because what I want it to do is actually start sending the data back, so that if any changes occur on the production machine, they will then be replicated back to these systems in the event that we have a failure. Sorry, in the event we need to switch back to our production systems, maybe after the outage, for example. So I'm just going to hit the failover button. Hopefully this will go and initiate the failover procedure, and it will actually cause replication to be reversed, as we can see, and it's going to start the virtual machine on the other host. So it looks like it's been successful. So if I now go to host 3, what we should actually see is the virtual machine is now running, and the virtual machine is coming online. Okay. Now if I just go and open up a command quickly and just try and ping that machine, okay, can actually see I've got an IP address, and now I'm sort of getting requests timed out, you see. So effectively, coming up, it should actually sort of stop responding at some point. So I've only got quite a small network, so it's all on the same physical cable, which doesn't help. So hopefully we've actually started up. If I go into the Hyper-V manager, or say into Event Viewer, come down into the Hyper-V logs, hopefully what we should see fairly shortly is there should be a message which actually tells us that it successfully applied the IP settings for the machine. Obviously the machine should have actually registered its new IP address with DNS. So if we jump across over onto our domain controller, hopefully go in and refresh our domain if I'm not too quick, we can actually see its IP address has now changed inside DNS. Okay, so we can actually see that we've had that changeover of address information. Now, obviously, the ability to be able to communicate with that machine from a client perspective is all going to be down to DNS timeouts. So if you think about the way DNS works out of the box, DNS records are cached for 20 minutes. So if I had a client which was talking to FS01 and we initiated this failover, FS01 would effectively go unavailable for that client until it requeries DNS, however long that would take, depending on what your timeout records are. So if I was to go and open up prompts here again, if we were just to go and do something like an IP config / display DNS, okay, hopefully we can actually see that FS01 still has a 1.10 address. If I was to flush my DNS cache, okay, and then hopefully try and ping the machine again, okay, hopefully we go and query DNS again, and now we have the 2 address. So hopefully you can see that actually in action. So we've actually switched the machine's IP address as part of that machine actually coming back online. And obviously now the changes are being replicated back the other way, so FS01 on host 2 is actually receiving those. In the event that we now want to switch back, and because again it would be a plan change, I can again just shut down FS01, and I could then initiate a plan change again, and again because I've actually configured the IP address settings on host 2 already, then to a plan failover, then it will go back to having its original IP address. So it will get its IP address injected successfully. Now, this ability to inject IP addresses is all down to the integration services. So the fact that the Linux operating system now being regarded as a first-class guest, IP injection is now supported on Linux hosts as well. So you could do this, for example, with CentOS or with Red Hat. So it's not just necessarily about Windows-based operating systems. Okay, so hopefully we've demonstrated the IP injection. So I just want to obviously finish off demonstrating the Hyper-V Replica, but without replicating the page file. So if I just go and hit Browse and just go and read that file that I've imported, hopefully we should be able to import the VM. Wait for it to connect to the file system. Just in terms of the demonstration that I just did as well with QA FS01, again, that machine, I'm not copying the page file. So exactly what I'm talking about here, I have set the QA FS01 up exactly the same way. So the page file wasn't being replicated between the 2 hosts. So see, this is showing the setup of what I did for that machine effectively. So if I select Web 01, so this is just going to import this machine. So this will be the base for my replica that I'm going to set up. Now you will notice, because I did an online export, I exported the machine while it was running. When it gets imported, it comes in as a saved state. You do need to delete that saved state in order to be able to use it for replication. So I was going to delete that. If you didn't delete the save state, when I sort of set the application, when I set the application up now, it would have actually complained and told you the machine was in a condition which didn't allow replication. So also I'm just going to specify my destination service. Obviously that's going to be host 3, because that's the machine which obviously I've imported the VM on. Okay, I'm going to use HTTP just for convenience in this instance. So here I'm actually now going to take the tick out of the box for replicating the page file. Okay, so that's how we deselect that file now. Again, how often do you replicate? I'll run with the defaults. Again, do you want the additional recovery points? So again, if you're not familiar with this in terms of what happened in R2, in 2012, you could have 15 hourly increments for bringing up machines in a previous state. Now you can have 24, so you can bring back a machine in 1 hour increments from the current time back in 1 hour chunks. So the idea behind that is, if you've had some sort of data corruption, if you've had, let's say, a malware outbreak, your production server might be affected by it, and therefore that's also got copied across onto your replica server. So it allows you to bring it back in an older point in time before that event happened. If you've got applications inside the virtual machine which support VSS, this will also allow us to QS the applications in there. So we will flush log files, all that back. So we get what we call is a crash consistent experience. And then in this instance now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, rather than send the replication across the network, I'm going to say use an existing virtual machine on the replica server as an initial copy. So because the machine's got the same name, it should find it and it should start to build replication. Okay, so here we're going to sort of start the initial replication, and we'll sort of see that the Web 01 on host 3 will start to see the changes. This does take a little while in terms of actually replicating the data, because it's got to do a bit more work in terms of working out what the differences are from the virtual machine that's running live and the virtual machine that you've actually got in the replica site. So you will notice at first it seems to take ages, and then the percentage jumps up in quite large values once it works out what the differences are and what data it then needs to send across. So it does take a little while for that replica, but it does obviously reduce the traffic in the initial replication. It also means we're now not going to be replicating page file changes. And just to show you, just in case anyone didn't believe me, if I go to my FS01 and just go to settings and go down to the replication section and come down to replication VHDs, you can see that I'm only replicating the data VHD and not replicating the page file VHD. Notice you can only change these values effectively at the point you set replication up. So if you thought, oh, I've got replication already, I might want to go and change this on a few VMs. Unfortunately, you can't change it on the running ones. You'll actually have to sort of disable replication and then re-enable it. But obviously, when you disable it, you can re-enable it straight away and say use existing VM if you wanted to. So so it would obviously minimise your replication traffic. So hopefully that sort of clears up those points that I was talking about. Now, one other thing which I don't really put in as an advanced conversation about replica and so on, but it might be something that you would consider from an interest point of view. I'll switch back to the slides. So hopefully you can see the slides. Is also the VHD format in terms of whether it's a differential, not a differential, a dynamically expanding disk, so I couldn't think of the word, or a full-sized, a thick disk, doesn't matter. So one of the things you can also do from a design point of view is you can have your production VMs using full-sized VHDs if you want, but actually have your replica copies using differencing ones, so that you can actually have less storage in your DR location. So you can reduce costs that way a little bit. Okay. I believe there's a few questions that are coming in. So let me just have a quick look. So there was one from memory. When testing this previously, the page file can't exist on a virtual SCSI disk and can only be relocated to an IDE disk. Is this correct? Well, if someone's actually had that experience, then certainly that's not an experience I've ever come across. So certainly, I've obviously just been using a virtual SCSI disk, and it works perfectly well. So this evening. Okay, I think that was because I answered the question about. There was a question about that page file. Done that one. Was it? Oh, no, so the question about orchestrator. The orchestrator question that was actually the fact that I was using Orchestrator to exercise the VM. So effectively, my file server, I've got Orchestrator running what we call a runbook, and it's actually updating the data in the VM. So it's basically overwriting files, creating new files, those sorts of things. So that it's actually live data being moved across as part of the replication. Obviously, someone said about the guest OS being 2008 R2 in terms of that virtual SCSI. I'd have to test, to be honest. I couldn't see that being a problem off the top of my head, but it would be something that I'd have to test, to be completely honest about that. So I'd rather not say that shouldn't be a problem. I don't have a 2008 R2 VM that I can test it on at this precise moment. What I will be able to do is, if you want to actually email me, that is something that I could test tomorrow. So if you wanted to email me, I could actually reply back to you with some testing against that. That's the best I can offer for that one, in terms of with that particular OS.
Oh,
Is there any more questions out there? We've covered them all. Yeah. Okay. So just jump back to a couple more slides, because what I'm going to talk about now and hopefully demonstrate is extended replica. So the extended replica was a brand new feature in 2012 R2. So significantly, what extended replica allows us to do is effectively copy our virtual machines to a third site. So you might use this to copy the virtual machines to a third recovery location of your own. So you might actually have 2 data centers and a DR data center. So you might want to create your own circle, if you like, of replication. Alternatively, and a fully supported configuration, and this is something Microsoft are actually discussing with a lot of hosters, is actually getting a service provider or a service hoster to actually host that additional copy of the virtual machine for you. So if you haven't got the facilities or the capacity in-house, you can get a third-party hoster. And one of the things that's quite important to remember, right back to the review slide, is there's no Active Directory requirement for using Hyper-V Replica. So you can quite happily use Hyper-V Replica with certificates for your authentication mechanism. So it wouldn't be, for example, like with live migration, where Active Directory is a requirement, that there's no requirement for you to be part of the same AD structure as the service provider. That can be quite a useful scenario. So I've got a question about the VHDs. I will go back to the VHD question someone's actually asked in a little bit when we wrap up the questions at the end. So just be aware that I have actually seen those, and I will actually come back to those questions at the end. So what we want to try and do is actually have a look at this and actually have a look at extended Hyper-V Replica in action. So I wanted to try and make this as real world as possible from the point of view of, if you was using a hoster. Because at the end of the day, I could sit here and configure it with Active Directory, and life would be easy, and it would be pretty straightforward. So what I wanted to do was actually have a machine which I'm going to run inside a workgroup and actually connect across to be able to use that third machine as my extended replica system. So we are going to use the same set of virtual machines. So I'm just going to again switch across and share my desktop. So just bear with me for a second. So hopefully you can see my desktop again, and we'll jump across to our hosts. Just bear with me. Again, too many toolbars. Okay, so effectively I've got my my VM's being replicated on host 3. Okay, we're only going to be interested in using we use the website one. Why not? Doesn't really matter which one we use. And I've actually got my service provider for QA learning Hyper-V host over here. You can actually see I did some testing earlier on with QA FSO1. Obviously, I'm not really worried about that, so we can I could delete that. I'm not really worried. We're just obviously making sure it was all working. So if I just go to Hyper-V host 2, just to show you, if I right-click on Web01 and go to Replication, you can see that I can do my planned failovers. You can see that I can pause replication. I can view itself. So there's no mention now of extended replica. However, if I go to host 3 and right-click, you can actually see, if I go to the replication menu, I've actually got an extend replication option. Okay, so if you were going to use Active Directory, you could use the extend replication option in exactly the same way as I set up my Web01 replication. No problems at all. Exactly the same way. If you're going to, as I am, basically connect to a machine which you don't share Active Directory for, then you've got to set up some certificates. So I'd just like to sort of talk a little bit about the certificates themselves that you need. So from a certificate point of view, if I just actually go across to my DC01 machine, and we just sign in, just want to show you the certificate template that I'm actually using. So hopefully we can go and open up the certificate authority software and actually go and have a look at the certificate template. Now, I'm just using one certificate authority. This authority has been trusted by both effectively my service provider and myself. Obviously, in the real world scenario, that might not be true. You might be using an external trusted party for one of the organizations. So you can see that I've got a Hyper-V Replica certificate template here. If I just open that up, the key things on the certificate template to be aware of are, if we go to the extensions, the application policies need to be configured for server and client-based authentication. This is used for mutual authentication, so both ends have to be able to authenticate. If we go to the subject name, okay, also I've sort of said supply in the request. So the key element here is the subject name needs to contain the fully qualified domain name of the actual host that Hyper-V Replica is going to be running on. So they're the key requirements as far as the certificate's concerned. Okay, so if I was just to go and open up, actually I can do it from Hyper-V host 3. If I was to go into the Hyper-V settings and to come down to the replication tool, you can see my certificates actually selected in here. If I just actually view the properties of the certificate, okay, and we just go to the details tab, hopefully if I scroll down, we should be able to see, it says if I can find it, lost it somewhere. Obviously there's the server and the client authentication. Okay, and in there somewhere, I can see it. Oh, there's the subject name. Okay, you can see the fully qualified name of the actual the Hyper-V host. One thing that's important to be aware of, if I actually go to the service provider machine, which is actually in a work group, okay, if I go to the Hyper-V settings and look at the certificate here, okay, again you will see, if we look at the subject name, I've actually got a fully qualified name in there. You still need to use fully qualified names for the workgroup based hosts as well. Okay, so just bear that in mind. You can get a very bizarre authentication error, and it normally comes back and tells you that the remote server terminated the connection abnormally. So in my instance, even though my SPQAL is not joined into my Active Directory domain, I have gone and defined a domain suffix for it. So the qal.com, which is my domain name. Obviously, if it was a hoster's machine in reality, it would have whatever the name was for the hoster. So just bear that in mind, okay? If you are going to sort of try and set this up or in a test environment. So we want to extend the replica. So I'm going to right click, hit replication, and choose to extend replication. So a similar wizard to what we get when we set up replication normally. So I'm just going to specify the name of the host I want to send the copy to. It knows that we can only communicate with that host using HTTPS, so I've selected that option, and I can pick the certificate that I want to use specifically for talking to that machine. So I'm going to use the same certificate. You then get to specify your replication frequency. Now, in 2012 R2, Microsoft gave us the ability to specify a replication frequency between effectively your production server and your first replica, if you like. You can specify a frequency of every 30 seconds, every 5 minutes, and every 15 minutes. For the extended replica, you can only specify 5 and 15 minutes, as you can see there. So I'm going to set that to every 5 minutes. You've got the ability to maintain additional recovery points if you want to. So again, you can bring a system up in a slightly older point in time if you want. Notice on this page though, you can't actually QS the application data. So if the machine was running, say for example, Exchange or SQL, you couldn't flush the logs. So it wouldn't actually produce you application consistent data at this moment. You're just relying on file system consistent data. And then again, you've got what's your initial replication mechanism. So I'll say send across the network this time. And then just hit next, and hopefully allow that to go and start building the remote machine. So this is going to obviously start to copy my machine across over onto the SPQAL machine. If I go to the replication tab down the bottom, if you can see down the bottom, you will now see that I now have an extended replication state. And also, if I right click on the machine and go to replication and hit view replication health, okay, you will also now notice that I now have an extended replication tag. So telling me that replication is effectively in progress, or the initial replication is in progress at this moment. So if I go back to host 2, where the production VM is actually running, okay, you'll notice on host 2, if I go to the replication and view replication health, this is unaware of the extended replication. Okay, so it's completely unaware that that's going on. It's only that sort of middle tier, if you like, that's aware. If I go to the service provider, and we can actually see the machine over at the service provider, we can see, again, if we look at the replication health, so view replication health, okay, obviously we're hopefully in the process of doing the initial replication, and it should just basically see this as a sort of a primary and a replica. So it actually sees 3 as the primary, even though obviously that machine's not running at all. Okay, so this end sort of doesn't really report that it's actually an extended replica. So it's only the machine in the middle that seems to be really aware of this sort of extended replica scenario. Okay, so we're just waiting now for that replication process to complete, for those changes to finish being synchronized across. So once this is complete, what we'll then do is we'll configure the IP settings so that, again, on the hoster, we will have the IP injection ready. And what we'll do is we'll actually initiate a failure type scenario. So we'll go for that option and hopefully see the website come online. So what I'm going to do to start with, hopefully, is I'm just going to go and open a web browser. And hopefully if I just go and hit refresh, that's actually the website that's coming from the virtual machine. So a nice sort of animal website. If we just jump across to my domain controller, again, I want to make sure you can see all the networking elements and just jump back into DNS. We can see we've got the record www for the QAL.com, which points us to the QA Web 01 QA.com. Obviously, QA Web 01 has currently got an IP address of 192.168.1.11. And obviously, I could go and set up the IP settings on the live machine. I could go and set them up on the replica copy if I wanted to. I'm not really worried about making those IP address changes in here at this moment in time, because I'm not going to use this machine at all. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my service provider machine, and I'm going to change the network settings on here. So hopefully settings, come into the network adapter, failover address. Now my network provider, my service provider's IP address is on a .3 network. You might start to spot a theme here with IP addresses, keeping them simple. So hopefully we can put in the subnet mask. Again, we can put in the correct default gateway information. So get that around the right way. And again, obviously the DNS server is not going to change. So we've set up our IP address settings just like we did before. This time, obviously, I've only configured them effectively on the extended machine. Okay, so we'll set those values. So what we need to do is we effectively need to initiate a failure. So what we're really saying here is, for whatever reason, we've lost the VM, we've lost, obviously, somehow the VM on host 2, and for whatever reason, we cannot use the VM on host 3 as well. So, you know, if I effectively just decide to go and turn this off, okay, I want to actually say that we've basically broken this. So I'm going to go obviously to my service provider. Actually, let's just make sure the website's broken, I guess, just to prove to you that it's hopefully what the website was coming from that machine. So hopefully if we try and refresh the website, you can see we've got a waiting message now. You know, the web page isn't coming back. So we can see that it seems to be pretty broken. So hopefully here, if I select this and go to replication, I should be able to initiate a failover. Okay, so here I'm actually getting the drop down about which point in time do I want to bring the system back up to. So I'm going to bring it back, obviously, back on the latest recovery point. But if I wanted to go to an older point in time, you could drop down and go back. Obviously, there will be sort of 1 hour increments. So hopefully I'm going to hit failover. Okay, that will effectively bring this machine online, and the machine's obviously starting to boot. As part of this, obviously what we should see is we should go out and inject the new IP address. Hopefully the machine will then go and update its record in DNS. So we should see those same actions perform as we saw with the FS01 virtual machine. So again, this comes back to those decision points that you have to make in a DR scenario in terms of record caching. So again, if we go back into my domain controller, and we just look at the records. If I go and look at the www record, I've actually configured this so that the time to live is every 2 minutes. So effectively, clients are going to cache that information for 2 minutes, and then they're going to query DNS again and say, I'm looking for www.qal.com, what's its IP address? So once I've got the failover virtual machine up and running, you know, clients should actually start to re-query for the IP address information within a couple of minutes. Obviously, that does put more work on DNS. So you have to balance with the frequency of lookups against the load. So hopefully, if we go back to QAL, we should be getting quite close. So we can just see the thumbnail, so the machine's actually come up online. So we should be getting to the point that we're going off, making the network changes. And actually, if I go to the networking tab here, you can see the IP address has been set, because it should reflect that in the status box there. So hopefully, if I was to go and open up just a PowerShell prompt, if I was to again to go do an IP config /display DNS, if I've been quick enough, what we might see is that the web address is still set to the old value, or maybe it's timed out. Okay, so it looks like it might have even timed out. Okay, looks like couldn't see it there in the list. So hopefully if I go into the web browser, maybe just go and hit a refresh. See if we get the information back from the website. While we're just waiting for that, if I go across to the domain controller, let's see if the DNS record has actually been updated. So the DNS record for Web 01 is now 3.11. We can see the website's back, and I'm now sure if I was to go and do the ipconfig display DNS again, we'd more than likely see the address in the list somewhere, and it's my lucky day. Still not there just yet, but we've got the right IP address and we've connected across to the machine successfully. So we can actually see that we've actually been able to use this extended failover mechanism to be able to, again, reach out to a remote location. So in my case, emulating a service provider that we maybe have a VPN connection to. So we can reach out to them in the event that we do have an on-site failure. So hopefully that sort of demonstrates that capability to you from a technology point of view. What you will notice when you actually have a failover scenario, you do have some options in terms of reversing the replication. So I can actually start to send the replication data back if I need to be able to sort of bring the system back online. Because if this web server has actually been having changes made to it, you want to synchronize those back onto your other hosts when you actually want to bring your other hosts back online. Also, if you had some sort of outage, which means you had to rebuild those other hosts, what you would need to do is effectively initially cancel replication and set it back up and replicate and reconfigure it to replicate back in the other direction. And then you can obviously switch over so your on-premise machine becomes the production machine by doing some form of planned failover. So that would be the way you could manage that. So hopefully that's just showing you the extended replica being set up and excuse me, just showing a quick example of a failure. So I think there was, say, a couple more questions which were sent. Someone asked about a quick question regarding the location of the VHDs. In my instance, the VHDs are all on directly attached storage. Ultimately, we wouldn't mind whether the VHDs were on, for example, on SAN. The key thing often a lot of people ask is, if I am using a SAN, can I use SAN replication to actually replicate the VHDs? And the simple answer today with that is no. Hyper-V Replica has to do the replication. It doesn't support, well, it doesn't have the capabilities today to have third-party replication engines plugged in to do the replication. If you wanted to, this could also be on SMB-free. So you could be having a VM on host 1 where its VHDs on an SMB share, if you wanted to, being replicated to another host. And the storage doesn't have to match. So I could, for example, do SAN or SMB on the production machine and copy to directly attached storage on the destination machine if I wanted to. They don't actually have to match in any way. So hopefully that sort of clears up those questions. In terms of future direction, it wouldn't surprise me if Microsoft start to enable integration with SAN vendor replication engines, but it's not there today. Someone also asked about differencing disks for replica VMs. I understand the whole chain parent would need to be copied to the replica host, and then the actual replica chain would be done to the replica's child differencing VHD. That is correct. If you are using differencing disks, so those that know VMware would refer to this as linked clones. you would need to make sure you've got the different the base disks all copied, and in that instance, the base disks would need to be on the same directory path as well. So that is correct. Okay. Does Hyper-V Replication support shared VHDX files? I've never tried that, I have to be honest, and I've not seen a support statement from Microsoft. Ultimately, I'm just trying to think of, just trying to work that one through in my head. I don't see any reasons. Actually, I can see a couple of reasons why you could get into a bit of a mess. It was something you need to be very careful with. Let me think about that one. Maybe drop me an email and I'll think about that one while I sleep. It's one of those ones that's going to wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning as I think through the configuration. In the extended failover, did you shut down host 3 or did bring up the extra failure box, take precedent and keep it shut down? I didn't shut down any hosts. All I did was shut down VMs. Obviously, normally in a situation, you would be shutting down hosts and so on and so forth. All I did was shut down VMs. I didn't actually shut down any of the physical boxes, and that's just because obviously I've got so few and I've got to sort of switch between them and so on. Someone's asked about the Hyper-V Replica broker. That's a really good question. In terms of the Replica broker, one of the things, again, as a sort of like, if you like, the beginning of Replica in 2012, we had a service called the Hyper-V Replica broker. So Hyper-V Replica doesn't care whether the source VM or the destination VM are in a cluster. So you can replicate standalone to standalone, as I was doing. You can replicate standalone to failover cluster. You can do failover cluster to failover cluster, or you could do failover cluster to standalone. It doesn't matter at all, okay? The problem you have with a cluster is VMs can move. That's basically the problem you have. So the issue we have with Replica is if a VM moves, how does the Hyper-V hosts know where the VMs move to? So if I move it from, so if I've got a cluster with my production VMs in, and I've got a standalone host, okay, how does the standalone host know where stuff moves inside the cluster? Especially if you've got things like a virtual machine manager running, and you've got dynamic load balancing going on with virtual machines. So that's what the broker's for. The broker effectively is the point of contact between non-Hyper-V, non-clustered Hyper-V hosts and clustered Hyper-V hosts. So the Hyper-V broker runs inside the cluster. So the non-clustered host, or even between clusters, to be honest, they would communicate with the broker, and the broker would then say, oh, that VM that you want to replicate with is actually on host X, and it would allow them to redirect the replication traffic. So in answer to the question, do we still need the Hyper-V Replica broker? Yes, we do. So in 2012 R2, the Replica broker is exactly the same. But it also brings on to an important question in terms of the extended replica and also when you're using certificates. When you're using certificates, the fully qualified name that you put in the certificate is the broker name, okay, for certificate-based authentication. So just bear that one in mind. Is it possible to still take virtual machine snapshots before making system changes and then apply delete snapshots when using replication for DR? So on your production VM, you can certainly take snapshots, and you can, so let's say, for example, you can do something like a service pack. So you wanted a snapshot, so you've got that ultimate get out of jail. If you take a snapshot, then you apply your service pack, and let's say everything's running okay. If you delete the snapshot, then everything's fine, and the replicate VM will carry on working, no problems at all. However, if you take a snapshot and you need to then, let's say, for example, the service pack has failed, and you decide, right, we're going to switch back, and we're going to go back to the pre-service pack snapshot. At that point, that will actually cause Replica to break. So you will need to reset up your synchronization. So you basically, Replica will fail at that point. So there are a couple of things that you can do. So, for example, if you are creating snapshots for the purpose of massively high-risk operations like that, you could actually choose to pause replication before you actually create the snapshot. So you pause replication, you create your snapshot. What you could then do is to go through your high-risk operation. If your high-risk operation is successful, then obviously you can re-enable synchronization, you can delete the snapshot, and everything will be okay. If obviously your high-risk operation has failed, and therefore you need to go back to the sort of pre-snapshot state, you can obviously roll back to that state. That's not going to cause any problems with the production, with the copy VM, and you can re-enable synchronization as well at that point. So that would be a way you could manage that. But if you allow replication to carry on after you've taken the snapshot and then you need to roll back, that will break replication. So I hope that answers all those questions. I think that's everything's in the list. Thank you for some excellent questions. Really appreciate those. Last thing I'd just like to mention, and just to make you aware of, I must admit I could have actually done another hour on Replica, to be honest, but we had to sort of draw the line somewhere. So the last page I just want to talk about is actually a feature which was sort of finally come out of beta and sort of gone live, which is something called the Windows Azure Recovery Manager. So as you would have seen, everything you do in basically Replica using the Hyper-V management console is manual. Obviously, you could script it. There's all the PowerShell commands there if you want to use the PowerShell commands. But with the Recovery Manager, that actually allows you to have a lot more orchestration. So it allows you to actually have the ability to automate the setup. So effectively, when new VMs come online, you can actually automate the replica creation, but it also allows you to automate failover as well. So the idea here, using Windows Azure and Virtual Machine Manager, it provides us with this sort of external control mechanism for controlling replica. So the key thing, and obviously if you come to some of our Tech Week sessions, we'll talk about Amazon Web Services, and there'll be some, I think there's some demonstrations being done in Azure on some of the courses, and some of them are being completely built and everything's run from Azure. But your VMs don't live in Azure. Okay, so effectively your VMs live on your sites. Okay, so your production site, your recovery site, and then effectively you actually get your data being replicated between the systems across your network. No data goes into Azure or anything along those lines. Okay. So in terms of the Azure Recovery Manager, it then allows you to sort of orchestrate through this. Now, in order to just be aware, in order to use this, and I did sort of put it on the slide, you do need to use the VMM, so the Virtual Machine Manager cloud infrastructure. So if you've not used or not seen Virtual Machine Manager, Virtual Machine Manager allows you to create cloud abstractions. So what it will allow you to do is take your physical hosts, and rather than present them as physical hosts, you present them as compute, you present them as networking, you present them as storage. So your VMs have to be in there effectively for this technology to actually work with them. So that is available. Obviously, it does require you to have a subscription. So unlike, for example, Hyper-V Replica, which sort of comes in the box and there's no cost for, once you've sort of licensed your base OSs, obviously Azure Recovery Manager does actually have costs and so on as an additional component. Okay, a couple more questions have just popped in. let's just have a quick look. Just bear with me as I scroll back a second. So is it possible to carry out IP injection at the host cluster level, affecting all the VMs on that failover? No, it's something you only configure on a per VM basis. You have to define each VM's IP address specifically. I guess the closest you could get to doing it at the host level is if you wanted to try and use network virtualization, which would give you some capability in that area. So network virtualization might be able to do what you want, but in terms of what I demonstrated, there's no host configuration. It's all VM configuration. So hopefully that answers that question. Something else about but Wall is probably a beast on its own right, similar to SCCM, etc. Probably a separate license required. I assume that's in reference to System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Obviously, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, there's sort of no licensing on its own for, because often you buy one System Center product, you've got the lot, which is, again, going back to advertising my session on Friday, Orchestrator, one of these, I think, Microsoft's best kept secrets. There's so many estates out there, go and buy a System Center because they want Ops Manager or because they want, Configuration Manager, for example, and they get this thing called Orchestrator, and because no one has any time, they never look at it, and it's arguably one of the first things you should go and implement as an amazing product. So obviously, as I mentioned, there is a subscription to Azure that would be needed, but if you've got the System Center stack, then obviously you'd have VMM as well. Okay. So I've got another question. With VMM and given 2 data centers, what is the best way to make it highly available in a scenario that one data center is unavailable in a disaster? I understand that I can't replicate a VMM configured in a highly available cluster using Hyper-V Replication. Yeah, so effectively, the VMM is not supported as part of sort of Hyper-V Replica. I have done it and it seems to work, but it is currently an unsupported configuration. And a lot of the things around VMM and Replica, with the exception of this recovery manager, is VMM's aware of Replica, but it doesn't really do much else with it. In terms of the 2 data center and actually building a highly available scenario, Microsoft have a really good white paper on that in terms of how you can build that and how you can replicate data between them in terms of your library engines and all those sorts of things. So again, if you either email the techweek@qa.com, I believe that email address won't actually be live till tomorrow, or if you email me directly, I can send you the link for that. So it's quite a large document, but I can send you the link which will actually describe a really good way of actually building highly available VMM across multiple data centers. So I appreciate that's only half an answer, but it's quite a long conversation, to be honest. Okay, I think I've only got a couple of slides, and that sort of gets me to the end. So in case you wanted to just learn more about the sort of things that we've been talking about here, obviously we do have some training courses. I'm not going to sort of sell them hard. The numbers are there if you're interested, but just wanted to make sure obviously we do have some extended training, and hopefully there's just a thank you very much from me. So hopefully, yeah, just under the 90 minutes, so that's 6:21. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate the questions. Obviously, I'll keep the line open for the next 10 minutes. If any questions appear in the chat box, I'll obviously gladly pick those up. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter. I also have a YouTube video channel. Some of the things that I've demonstrated, not the extended replica, but some of the things I've demonstrated are actually up on YouTube as videos, as well as obviously you'll be able to get access to this after the event as well. So thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully it's been useful for you. Have a good evening.